For 7 agonizing years in the United States Congress, Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez has utterly failed to pass a single bill into law, not one. She boasts an empire of 8.6 million Instagram followers, flaunts a custom Met Gala dress, dominates glossy magazine covers, and generates more viral cable news clips than most seasoned lawmakers have committee meetings. Yet, back in her home district, spanning the Bronx and Queens, working-class constituents have watched their rent skyrocket every consecutive year she has held office. The reckoning finally arrived when Senator John Kennedy meticulously laid her barren legislative record bare on the committee table, asking a singular, devastating question she fundamentally could not answer. It was a masterclass in political cross-examination. Ocasio-Cortez sat across the aisle with one elbow confidently resting on the table, her chin tilted upward at an exact, calculated angle, posture suspended somewhere between defiance and unwavering confidence. It was the practiced tilt of a political celebrity who has been photographed 10,000 times and knows precisely which angle the camera lenses favor most. Launching into her offensive, she declared that the senator sitting opposite her belonged to a bygone generation responsible for constructing every broken system. Modern progressives were desperately trying to dismantle from the housing and climate crises, sweeping inequality, and healthcare failures. These were not novel dilemmas, she argued, but rather antiquated problems birthed by archaic policies and fiercely defended by out-of-touch bureaucrats who had survived in government for so long that they tragically confused sheer inertia with actual experience. Pivoting smoothly, she turned her gaze away from Kennedy and directly toward the waiting cameras, instinctively playing to the mass audience she truly intended to reach. With theatrical precision, she pointed out that the senator had been entrenched in Washington since before she was even born, openly questioning if a single metric in his home state of Louisiana had improved during his tenure. Had poverty magically vanished? Had the healthcare system seen remarkable improvements? Had any working family woken up and declared, "Thank God Senator Kennedy is in the Senate"? Turning back to face the room, she offered a thinly veiled concession, stating she respected the institution and the people within it, but flatly refused to confuse mere seniority with tangible results. She delivered her finishing blow, asserting that certain politicians had occupied the building for decades with absolutely nothing to show for their tenure except a reserved parking spot and a taxpayer-funded pension. She allowed the word pension to hang in the tense air, accompanied by a razor-sharp half-smile, mocking the establishment for labeling her faction as inexperienced. In front of a captive national audience, she had effectively dismissed the veteran lawmaker as an aging, useless relic of a failed era. But Senator Kennedy had not yet opened the manila folder sitting ominously before him. Inside that unpretentious cover lay the unvarnished reality of her 7-year tenure, topped by a damning internal campaign document detailing exactly why she had personally executed 25,000 high-paying jobs slated for her own constituents. Kennedy did not snap back. He simply absorbed the blistering insult with the stoic endurance of a man sitting through a passing storm, appearing entirely unhurried and utterly unsurprised. His hands remained neatly folded on the desk, his signature reading glasses perched precariously at the end of his nose, and his mouth sealed shut. He strategically allowed the echo of her aggressive monologue to seep into the very fabric of the room, into the heavy carpets, the rich wood paneling, and the hushed gallery, where spectators were still nervously processing her mocking use of the word pension. He waited an excruciating 3, then 4 seconds. In a mesmerizing display of atmospheric control, he slowly removed his glasses and methodically cleaned the lenses with the hem of his necktie. It was an incredibly small, almost jarringly domestic gesture that ostensibly had no place in a high-stakes Senate hearing room, yet it commanded the space perfectly radiating the quiet power of a man who categorically refused to be rushed and demanded the entire room recognize it. Sliding the glasses back onto his face, his voice rumbled forth, slower and far more deliberate than usual, heavily laden with the full, unapologetic width of his Louisiana drawl, where every vowel was generously afforded the space it was naturally born to occupy. Well, ma'am, you're right about one thing, he conceded, offering a single measured nod, the kind of dismissive acknowledgement a seasoned debater grants to a point deemed too trivial to contest. He openly admitted his age, noting he had been old for quite some time. He was old when she was still mixing drinks as a bartender, old when she first ran for her congressional seat, and he would in all likelihood still be old when her time in Congress abruptly concluded, which he dryly noted, given her current trajectory, might arrive much sooner than she anticipated. Up in the gallery, a spectator nervously pressed his lips together, intently studying his hands, forcing the camera to guess whether he was wrestling to suppress a grin or desperately trying to compose himself. Kennedy paused again, this time not for cheap theatrical effect, but to summon a visceral memory. His eyes drifted past the suffocating confines of the hearing room, looking beyond the marble walls and the thicket of microphones, transporting himself to a different era. Dropping his voice half a register, making it resonate deeper rather than louder, mimicking the gravity of recalling something profoundly authentic, he explained the true meaning of growing older. Here's the thing about being old, Congresswoman. Old means, I remember, he stated, recounting an era when a blue-collar factory worker in her very district could comfortably cover their monthly rent with a single paycheck. He remembered when ordinary families scattered across Queens actually owned their modest homes, possessing a tangible mortgage, a mailbox, and a front door key, rather than being forced to sleep 3 to a room in a cramped, illegal basement apartment. He vividly recalled when a Bronx resident could walk onto a business floor on a Monday morning and secure a legitimate job by that same afternoon. He wasn't talking about the precarious modern gig economy, exhausting side hustles, or a grueling 3-hour shift delivering fast food for a faceless app. He was talking about a real job secured with comprehensive benefits and a pension. Kennedy let that specific word pension drop onto the table, aggressively reclaiming the exact term she had weaponized against him just 30 seconds prior, entirely stripping it of its venom and recasting it as a symbol of foundational American stability and future security. Fixing his gaze on her, he challenged her desire to critique what his generation had allegedly destroyed by reminding her that they had actively built the thriving middle class that once defined her district. Flipping open the dread-inducing folder, he demanded to know precisely what she had allowed to happen to it. Pressing his advantage, Kennedy noted her 7 years of service in the United States Congress and asked for a hard metric, exactly how many bills that she personally sponsored had successfully been signed into law. Ocasio-Cortez attempted to deflect, arguing passionately that effective legislating should never be narrowly measured by the sheer volume of bills bearing a representative's name, but rather by the powerful grassroots movements built and the societal conversations shifted. Cutting through the political spin, Kennedy's voice turned remarkably gentle, adopting the patient, unyielding tone of a veteran teacher realizing a student is desperately trying to dodge a fundamental question. Ma'am, it's a number, he softly pressed. Cornered, she insisted she had introduced highly significant legislation specifically championing the Green New Deal, which she claimed fundamentally reshaped the national dialogue. Kennedy peered sharply over the top rims of his reading glasses, dissecting her phrasing. Introduced, he corrected firmly, not passed. Extracting a single sheet of paper from his heavily armed folder, he delivered the fatal statistical blow. The answer was an undeniable 0. In 7 years, occupying a seat in the most powerful legislative body on earth, she had not successfully shepherded a single solitary piece of legislation into law. Citing GovTrack, a strictly nonpartisan congressional tracker, completely unaffiliated with Republican operatives or conservative blogospheres, he revealed she ranked a staggering 230th out of 240 sitting Democrats in raw legislative effectiveness during the 116th Congress. After letting the abysmal ranking of 230th settle over the room, he placed the damning page flat on the table. 0 bills, he summarized, pulling a second sheet of paper. Reading aloud, he juxtaposed her 8.6 million Instagram followers against her shockingly meager 11 days spent speaking on the House floor during the entire 117th Congress. To twist the knife, he revealed that during that exact same time frame, she had published a staggering 412 Instagram posts. He didn't raise his voice to argue the disparity. He simply laid the two wildly disproportionate figures side by side, much like placing two contrasting photographs in an album, allowing the devastating reality of the numbers to expose the grift. She had utilized the prestigious floor of the United States House of Representatives, the very platform her constituents had entrusted her to command a mere 11 times over 2 years, while prioritizing her digital brand with 412 social media dispatches. Folding his hands, Kennedy calmly observed that this extreme ratio told a very specific, uncomfortable story, even when the subjects of the narrative desperately wished to suppress it. Turning the page, his tone shifted dramatically, moving closer and adopting an intimate gravity reserved for discussing human suffering rather than abstract statistics. He focused fiercely on the 14th District, spanning the Bronx and Queens, noting the relentless annual surge in median rent since she assumed office, and the horrifying reality that poverty in the South Bronx currently hovered above 30%. He described the dystopian conditions inside the New York City public housing buildings where her most vulnerable constituents languished, surviving brutal winters, devoid of heat or hot water, trapped in suffocating hallways infested with rats and walls coated in toxic mold. Kennedy pointedly acknowledged that the Congresswoman was acutely aware of these atrocities. After all, she had orchestrated high-profile PR tours, posed for somber photographs, and relentlessly posted about the squalor on her feeds. He deliberately paused, allowing the suffocating distance between performative posting and actual legislative fixing to permeate the chamber, a vast chasm separating a viral photograph of black mold from the grinding, unglamorous work of drafting a law that actually eradicates it. Over 7 years, she had failed to fix it, failed to pass a bill addressing it, and failed to even drag a relevant bill to the House floor for a vote. Posting is not the fixing, Congresswoman. Kennedy hammered home, bluntly reminding her that desperate constituents could not physically reside inside an ephemeral Instagram story. In the fourth row of the gallery, an older, gray-haired woman sitting by herself with her purse securely resting on her lap offered a single, intensely private nod, the unmistakable validation of an ordinary citizen who had agonizingly waited years to finally hear someone forcefully articulate the silent frustration she harbored. Kennedy painted a heartbreaking picture of innocent children currently growing up in dilapidated Bronx public housing, breathing in ceiling mold, who would officially turn 18 before their elected representative managed to pass her first piece of binding legislation. Looking dead at her over the rims of his glasses, he asked what she intended to tell those forgotten youths, that she had managed to secure an invite to the glamorous Met Gala, that she had amassed 8.6 million followers. A child in NYC housing with mold on his wall cannot eat a follower, Congresswoman, he stated with chilling finality. Visibly bristling, Ocasio-Cortez leaned aggressively forward, elbows planting firmly onto the committee table, tightly clasping her hands. Her voice adopted a hyper-precise, calculated cadence, the trademark tone she reflexively deployed when forcefully constructing an ideological argument she deeply believed in, carefully laying each individual word like a load-bearing brick. She stubbornly reiterated her defense, arguing that genuine legislative effectiveness is never measured by hollow vanity metrics, but by the colossal movements birthed, the vital conversations shifted, and the legendary Overton window decisively moved. She triumphantly claimed that prior to her arrival in Congress, the halls of power were entirely devoid of discussions regarding a Green New Deal, a radical federal jobs guarantee, or the unprecedented scale of economic investment required for the nation to simply survive the ensuing 50 years. She fiercely credited herself with forcing those massive concepts onto the national table, characterizing her disruptive presence as the very definition of 21st century political leadership. Defending her relentless social media addiction, she unapologetically justified her massive Instagram usage by insisting she was actively meeting the working class exactly where they were, scrolling on their phones in cramped kitchens and break rooms, rather than broadcasting into the void on C-SPAN at 2 o'clock on a Tuesday afternoon. She lobbed a counter-insult, suggesting Kennedy and his archaic peers could happily continue sitting in empty legislative chambers talking to themselves and delusionally labeling it legislating. Behind her, an anxious staffer reached out to subtly adjust the crisp collar of her blazer, a tiny, remarkably unnecessary, nervous gesture, typically exhibited by handlers who prematurely believe their principal has successfully landed a rhetorical knockout blow. Kennedy patiently waited for the frivolous adjustment to conclude, allowing her impassioned defense to awkwardly float in the heavy room air for a few seconds past the point of comfort, akin to politely letting a brash dinner guest conclude a misguided toast before raising his own glass to deliver reality. When he finally spoke, the excruciating slowness of his delivery became the weapon itself. Acknowledging her proud claim of shifting the abstract Overton window, he offered a patronizing nod before unleashing a devastating reality check. The impoverished people suffocating in her district do not reside inside the theoretical Overton window. They live in crumbling apartments lined with toxic mold, brutalized by merciless landlords who systematically hike the rent every January. He methodically dismantled her entire political philosophy, noting that an impoverished family cannot possibly cover a punitive rent payment by merely moving a conversation. They can only be protected by the hard passage of binding laws. Unfolding and calmly refolding his hands, he struck again. And you haven't passed one. Behind Ocasio-Cortez, the staffer visibly froze, declining to adjust anything further. Pivoting to a new chapter of economic devastation, Kennedy announced his intention to dissect the infamous massacre of 25,000 local jobs. He recited the grim historical timeline with the detached, clinical precision of an executor reading a foreclosure deed at a property closing, citing dates, names, massive numbers, and fatal consequences. In 2018, the tech titan Amazon formally announced ambitious plans to construct its coveted second headquarters directly in Long Island City, Queens, immediately adjacent to her deeply impoverished district. The transformative economic package guaranteed 25,000 permanent jobs, boasting an average lucrative salary of $150,000, explicitly projected to generate a staggering $27 billion in desperately needed tax revenue for New York over a 2-decade span. The deal enjoyed overwhelming bipartisan establishment support. The Democratic Governor Andrew Cuomo championed it. The Democratic Mayor Bill de Blasio fought for it. The local community board eagerly approved it, and the powerful construction unions desperately wanted it. It was a golden ticket for 25,000 struggling local families. Yet, the Congresswoman ferociously opposed the historic deal, relentlessly campaigning against the influx of capital by aggressively branding it, in her own documented words, as a catastrophic symbol of corporate greed and worker exploitation. The relentless progressive pressure campaign culminated on the 14th of February 2019, a darkly ironic Valentine's Day massacre, when Amazon officially pulled the plug on New York. They ruthlessly packed up the jobs, the massive tax revenue, and 20 years of guaranteed economic revitalization, shipping the entire lucrative empire down south to Virginia. Kennedy dramatically laid two pieces of paper side by side on the mahogany table. On his left sat a stark printout of her jubilant victory tweet from that fateful day, loudly proclaiming that dedicated, everyday New Yorkers had victoriously defeated Amazon's corporate greed, worker exploitation, and the terrifying power of the richest man in the world. On his right sat the irrefutable, catastrophic math: 25,000 vanished jobs, $150,000 average salaries vaporized, and $27 billion in civic revenue completely wiped out. He ruthlessly summarized the disastrous exchange in her warped narrative of defeating corporate greed. The everyday working-class New Yorkers she claimed to protect received absolutely nothing in return: zero jobs, zero tax revenue, zero construction contracts, zero paychecks. Kennedy twisted the political knife by quoting her own Democratic ally, Governor Cuomo, who did not mince words, labeling the catastrophic withdrawal a lost economic opportunity directly caused by a small group of politicians who selfishly put their own narrow political interests above their community. Your governor said that Congresswoman about you, Kennedy, stated plainly, letting the betrayal hang. Turning the page, he described the shattered dreams of the small, family-owned businesses scattered across Queens, the neighborhood restaurants, local laundromats, corner bodegas, and expanding daycare centers that had frantically started hiring new staff and renovating their storefronts, desperately believing an economic miracle was finally arriving. They had mortgaged their futures to prepare for a massive financial boom that she single-handedly canceled. He noted with grim finality that many of those small businesses permanently shuttered their doors, not due to a volatile national economy or unpredictable market forces, but entirely because of her self-serving political sabotage. Reaching deep beneath his imposing stack of documents, Kennedy extracted his final, most lethal piece of evidence. He announced he was about to read a highly sensitive, internal polling memo authored by her own campaign team, securely obtained by the committee directly from a disillusioned former staffer. Adjusting his reading glasses one last time, he read the damning text with torturous deliberation, granting every single percentage point its devastating gravitational weight, allowing the irrefutable math to seamlessly do the horrific work. Her own sophisticated campaign polling unit had thoroughly surveyed her district regarding the controversial Amazon megadeal, discovering that an overwhelming 67% of likely voters, a massive 2 out of every 3 people she was sworn to represent, fervently supported the headquarters and desperately wanted those high-paying jobs. Looking up from the page to ensure she felt the sting, he continued reading the brutal second half of the memo. While the locals begged for economic relief, a staggering 84% of her lucrative national progressive donor base, the wealthy, out-of-touch elites financing her campaigns from comfortably affluent enclaves in California, Massachusetts, and Oregon, the rabid social media followers who had never physically walked a single grimy block in Queens vehemently opposed the corporate deal. Kennedy read the cold, calculated, internal recommendation at the absolute bottom of the leaked memo, his voice maintaining a flat, terrifying consistency where the sheer absence of emotional change was itself the most chilling change. The operatives had clearly written that while the local district numbers strongly favored the economic deal, the national donor and personal brand metrics were overwhelmingly clear, opposing Amazon perfectly aligned with the highly lucrative national progressive lane. The formal campaign recommendation was to forcefully oppose the jobs. Setting the explosive page down at the far end of his row of evidence, he repeated the horrific core truth. The donor and brand numbers dictated her actions. Her own sophisticated internal apparatus had explicitly informed her that 2/3 of her starving district desperately wanted the financial lifeline, yet they directly instructed her to ruthlessly kill the deal. She did not execute 25,000 jobs because it was morally righteous or fundamentally beneficial for the struggling families living on her actual street. She mercilessly killed their economic futures strictly because it polled exceptionally well, with wealthy elitists donating to her war chest from 3,000 miles away, armchair socialists who had never once set foot in her crumbling district. The desperate people of Queens pleaded for jobs, while her wealthy donors demanded a viral, anti-corporate headline. Folding his hands with utter finality, Kennedy delivered the ultimate judgment. She deliberately chose the headline. She had maliciously slaughtered her own district's prosperity for the fleeting approval of distant campaign financiers. Rising slowly from his chair, Kennedy transformed the hearing room into a graveyard of political ambition. He walked the entire length of the polished table, deliberately touching each damning page as he passed it. The barren legislative record, the absurd Instagram ratio, the catastrophic Amazon statistics, and the smoking gun polling memo. With every physical touch, he marked another wasted year, another spectacular failure, allowing them to quietly accumulate until he forcefully tallied them out loud. 0 passed bills in 7 agonizing years. Touch. Ranked 230th out of 240 inches legislative effectiveness. Touch. A pitiful 11 days on the House floor compared to 412 shallow Instagram posts. Touch. 25,000 life-changing jobs brutally killed. Touch. A leaked memo proving she actively betrayed her own constituents for donor cash. Touch. Stopping at the far end of the long table, he locked eyes with her across the sprawling expanse of white pages detailing her political sins. Addressing her previous insult, he fully embraced the label. She had called him old, and he confidently agreed. He was profoundly old, he noted, possessing a voice now burdened with the immense weight of a sacred duty carried for a lifetime and finally being carefully set down. He was old enough to explicitly remember an era when the sacred title of representative actually possessed profound meaning. It meant fiercely advocating for the physical people who organically elected you, not bowing to shadowy PAC donors, funneling dark money from entirely unvisited zip codes, not catering to legions of phantom Instagram followers, and certainly not groveling for invitations to elite, celebrity-filled galas. True representation meant fighting for the exhausted citizens living on the actual street, the weary commuters riding the decrepit subway systems, and the frightened parents sending their children to decaying public schools plagued by toxic ceiling mold. Pausing heavily, his formidable tone retreated to a significantly quieter, far more devastating place, a rhetorical space utterly devoid of cold statistics, viral ratios, or partisan legislation, focusing entirely on a solitary, marginalized child trapped in a freezing Bronx apartment, completely unaware she was the focal point of a congressional hearing. Kennedy painted the haunting image of a 7 or 8-year-old girl enduring life inside the very New York City public housing projects. The Congresswoman shamelessly exploited for viral photo ops and guided press tours. He described the young girl walking to school past a desolate, vacant gravel lot where a bustling, job-producing factory used to stand, returning home to a dilapidated apartment where the vital winter heat routinely failed to turn on during the freezing month of January. He prophesied a looming day of reckoning when that forsaken girl finally grows up, learns to read, learns to research, and learns to demand accountability. She will inevitably examine the Congresswoman's barren legislative record. Looking directly at her supposed progressive savior, the young woman will ask the ultimate, unavoidable question, what did you actually do for me? Kennedy ruthlessly predicted Ocasio-Cortez's pathetic, hollow response. she would desperately ramble about shifting the theoretical Overton window, point to the grandiose Green New Deal that spectacularly failed to ever pass, showcase her curated Instagram grid, and brag about wearing a provocative dress to the Met Gala. In response, the betrayed child would ultimately deliver the exact same crushing verdict every broken generation eventually levels at a fraudulent leader who peddled false promises and systematically failed to keep a single one. Removing his glasses with a grim finality, Kennedy folded the frames and placed them gently onto the mahogany table directly beside the final page of her ruined record. "That's it," he concluded softly, allowing the heavy, unanswerable questions to permanently sink into the dead silence of the room, settling like a massive stone plunging to the pitch-black bottom of a deep well, immovable and absolute. Acknowledging her opening volley, he admitted his generation may very well have broken certain things, but critically, they also built monumental foundations, sprawling factories, vital road networks, critical schools, and life-saving hospitals, constructing the nation with their own calloused hands, broken backs, and hard-earned tax dollars. "You haven't built anything," he declared with terrifying clarity. "Not one single thing in 7 years. And the only thing you have ever successfully torn down is 25,000 high-paying jobs that your own people desperately wanted." Kennedy heavily lowered himself back into his seat, cementing his absolute victory. "That's the record. Not mine, yours." The committee chairman, sensing the absolute slaughter, cautiously inquired if the gentlewoman from New York wished to enter a formal response. Ocasio-Cortez slowly opened her mouth, defensively beginning, "I have dedicated my career," but the very word career disastrously hung in the charged air between her trembling lips and the hot microphone, instantly mutating into an unbearable weight. As she heard her own voice utter the word, the crushing reality of those 7 barren years and the agonizing specter of zero passed bills violently collided with her sentence, stopping her momentum entirely like a massive, unyielding stone, instantly snapping a wooden wheel. Her trademark chin, which had been defiantly tilted upward in supreme arrogance since the moment she arrogantly took her seat, the carefully branded photogenic dare that defined her entire political persona finally broke. It wasn't a theatrical collapse, but a highly visible, humiliating lowering of a mere quarter of an inch, precisely mimicking the sad, defeated way a proud flag drops dead against a pole the exact second the wind entirely dies. Her panicked eyes darted away from Kennedy, scanning the long table, the scattered pages, and the endless row of damning white rectangles that comprised her exposed fraud. Her hands retreated defensively to her lap, completely hidden from public view. Stumbling through the wreckage, she whispered, "My record," before an agonizing, suffocating space swallowed the room where her next confident word was supposed to confidently land. "Is a work in progress." She finally choked out. It was a pathetic 6-word surrender, undoubtedly the quietest, most defeated sentence she had ever uttered in a public forum. Up in the tense gallery, the older gray-haired woman, who had privately nodded during Kennedy's poignant defense of the working class, stared down at Ocasio-Cortez with a mixture of pity and disgust, gazing at the Congresswoman the exact way a disappointed grandmother looks upon a foolish child who has just been caught red-handed orchestrating a massive disaster, yet remains entirely too immature to comprehend the sheer catastrophic size of it. Kennedy, entirely lacking malice, but overflowing with devastating finality, responded very gently, "A work in progress." "Yes, ma'am," he softly agreed, pausing for maximum lethality. "But for the desperate people of your district, it has been allegedly in progress for 7 agonizing years. They would very much like to finally see some actual results." The viral clip exploded across the digital landscape with the unstoppable, terrifying velocity of a modern political nuke. It fractured into two distinct, inescapable versions. The short, brutal 60-second cut a rapid-fire montage highlighting zero past bills, the absurd 8.6 million followers, the pathetic 11 days on the floor versus the 412 Instagram posts, culminating with the devastating knockout punch regarding the Overton window, raked in a staggering 40 million views in a mere 48 hours. The longer, unedited 1-minute version, stretching from Kennedy's stoic admission of his age all the way to his mic drop conclusion of "that's the record," became a cultural phenomenon. It was the rare piece of political theater that ordinary Americans intentionally watched on large televisions in their quiet living rooms, sitting alone or alongside their spouses in the evening, deliberately cranking the volume all the way up because a seasoned statesman was finally saying out loud the exact painful truths they had been silently thinking for years. The political fallout was immediate and utterly ruthless. Within 24 hours, 4 terrified Democratic members of the New York congressional delegation panicked and released desperately crafted public statements. While cowardly refusing to explicitly mention Ocasio-Cortez by name, every single one of them strategically deployed the loaded buzzword accountability to distance themselves from her radioactive blast radius. Simultaneously, the FEC officially launched a highly aggressive preliminary review strictly investigating the leaked internal campaign polling memo. Adding insult to massive injury, Amazon's corporate public relations office released a masterfully petty, single-line statement that communicated infinitely more in its sheer mocking brevity than a 1,000-page press release ever could. The offer for New York remains on the table. Across the digital sphere, the damning hashtag number "Their Accord" dominated trending charts for 3 consecutive relentless days. Beyond the blinding flash of vanity metrics and the chaotic blood sport of Washington, the raw, rotting corpse of human devastation lay entirely exposed. In Queens, 63-year-old Miguel sat entombed in the suffocating quiet of his daughter's cramped living room, a man permanently stripped of his proud 4-year business legacy because his radical congresswoman maliciously torpedoed the Amazon mega deal that would have delivered the mere 25 daily customers he desperately needed to survive. 1,000 miles away in the muggy Louisiana dusk, Senator John Kennedy found absolutely no joy in his flawless rhetorical execution. Sipping warm iced tea on his porch, he quietly mourned to his wife over the phantom 7-year-old Bronx girl left shivering in mold-infested public housing by a representative entirely too intoxicated by digital fame to pass a single protective law. Meanwhile, trapped inside the sterile fortress of her D.C. apartment, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez watched her carefully curated online empire violently fracture under a relentless digital siege, haunted by Kennedy's inescapable question, "What did you actually do for me?" As the terrifying mathematical void of her barren record, 0 past bills, 25,000 slaughtered jobs, and a leaked memo proving she sold out starving constituents for wealthy donor headlines finally suffocated her political arrogance, a sharp, violent buzz shattered the silence of her kitchen. Her encrypted phone lit up with a message from an unknown number displaying a grainy, time-stamped photograph of a dilapidated Bronx storefront mocking her with a peeling grand reopening sign, followed by a cryptic text that instantly turned her blood to ice and signaled a terrifying new reckoning